Welcome to Swell Session EP.11, presented by the Well Studio. I'm your host, Jen Sprinkle. This is our 7th podcast of a special series for our Prayers for the Dreamer book club. Today's interview is with Maggie Whitley. I chat with Maggie about her personal journey of living simple that all started with a trip to Africa. She and her husband quit their jobs, sold most of their belongings, and moved to California, all about the time she found out she was pregnant. Simplicity looks different for everyone. It could be simplicity with things, with our schedules, and even our relationship. And please note, during the time of this podcast, we had a monsoon hit for about an hour, so you might hear a little bit of thunder. Hope you enjoy. Hi, Maggie.
Hey, Jen.
Thank you so much for joining us today on our Swell session for Prayers for the Dreamer book club.
Yes, it's great to be chatting with you today.
Well, tell us a little bit about you.
Let's see. My husband, Zach, and I, we've been married for 7 years. We just celebrated our anniversary Sunday, so 2 days ago. Thank you. And we've really been on a journey since we got married. We were both born and raised in Michigan and lived there until we were about 22. And so shortly after we got married, we were living in Detroit, and he was working in his industry, and I suppose I was too, but it wasn't like a great dream job for me. But anyway, we were living in Detroit, and we both lost our jobs due to the economy. And that was sort of a catalyst for getting us to Minneapolis. We moved to Minneapolis about 7 months after we lost our jobs. We were unemployed that whole time. And Zach found a job, and then I found a job, and things are moving along really well. I started to really pick up my handmade business. At the time, I was working on Gussie Sews and hiring assistants and just growing the brand and growing the community online. And then Zach was saying that he would love to live in Los Angeles and work out there, which is where we currently live. So we packed things up, not too much, just whatever could fit into our Jeep, and drove from Minneapolis to Los Angeles. And that was almost 3 years ago now. And since moving here, we've had 2 babies.
Oh my goodness.
So that's the really short, condensed version. We've just, 7 years. A lot has gone on in 7 years. I would say a big part of what has helped us prepare for LA is going to Tanzania with Compassion. Just over 3 years ago now. That was, of course, it was a life-changing trip, but it is continuing to just show up in our lives, even though it's been about 3 years now since we've been back.
So tell us a little bit more about your trip to Tanzania and tangibly how that really impacted you and Zach.
Yeah, so, I don't think I'll forget this story for a really long time. I was pretty much like knee-deep in my handmade business. And one day I had gotten an email from Sean Groves, and he leads all of the blogger trips that Compassion takes. And they go all over the world. And he was inviting me to consider joining them in May for their trip to Tanzania. And I remember I wrote back and I told him, sure, I'll go as long as my husband can go, thinking for sure that they would not bring us both on. And then next thing I know, I was calling Zach at work and telling him that we needed to get passports and we were going to Africa.
And this was while you were in Minneapolis, or had you already moved? Okay, you were...
Yep, we were in Minneapolis, and we were actually renting a home that half of it was kind of dedicated for Gussie Sews, and the other half we were living out of. And it was pretty large. It was way more space than we needed. We did that intentionally so that we could work the business out of half of it. But I just remember like coming home from Tanzania and sitting on our couch. I had like this red couch that I loved that we ended up selling when we moved to LA. But sitting on our red couch and thinking, I don't even want to sit on this couch anymore. Like, it's too comfortable. It's too beautiful. We just spent a little over a week in Africa, and most of their furniture were like rolled up plastic bags for comfort in some sort of frame. So a lot of the beds that they slept on, if they didn't sleep right on the dirt, on the floor, they were made out of plastic bags. And it was kind of the beginning of just feeling like we had way more than we needed, and it was making me feel a little bit uncomfortable to have those luxuries. And, and then a couple of months later, Zach and I started talking about moving, and it was also around that time that I had found out I was pregnant with our firstborn. So Zach was like, should we go? Should we still move? And, we're going to be having a baby in March. So I told him yes, that I felt like we definitely needed to go, and, God would provide, and this was part of our journey. So we sold like 90% of our belongings. We sold so much stuff. Zach's parents came out when we were in Minneapolis and helped us with the big garage sale. So we drove out to LA with just a few special possessions and our clothes and our dog, and we just had our Jeep, and we kind of rebuilt our home out here. And it's been almost 3 years. I think I mentioned that. It's been 3 years already.
It's such a brave story, because I can imagine, I'd love to hear from you the response from your community of friends and your family, and how they responded to this very bold, to them probably dramatic, scary, risky decision that you two were making.
Yeah. For the most part, they were all super supportive, but I'm sure they, in their minds, they probably didn't want to say out loud, like, what are you doing? Are you worried about this or that? But, when I sit here in our home, we have moved twice since we've been in LA. And just, like, looking around at, like, our furniture and shoes, like, even now, I only have a few pairs of shoes, but, like, when we moved out here, I probably had, like, 2 or 3 pair. And I don't have that much more now. But it's just been interesting, like, looking at our home and seeing how much we have compared to what we brought out here, but then comparing it to what we've had in the past, or, perhaps what our neighbors may have, and how different those numbers look. There are days when I'm, like, making piles at the door for when Zach comes home, and I'm like, this needs to maybe be thrown out, and we can donate this, and we need to sell this. And it's just like an interesting process to be in, where I'm constantly, like, reevaluating what we have, and is it serving us well? Is it, like, helping our family? Is it something that I'm having to move around and clean a lot? Do we need it? Should we keep it? Our apartment it's small. It's about 600 square feet.
Our story, I've shared it a little bit. I might have shared it in another podcast. But our story, my husband and I, it's very similar, and felt called to sell our house and sell I always say the same thing, about 90% of our belongings. And at the time, we didn't know where we were going to move to and what our lives were going to look like. We just felt like God was calling us to make more margin for friends and family and ministry, and really entrepreneurship, because we were just very wired that way. And when you are an entrepreneur, you have to stay pretty lean. And he had really just started preparing our hearts. And I remember I did share this in another podcast. I remember somebody asking me at our estate sale, is this so hard for you to sell, all these things that your wedding china and all your furniture? And I honestly told her, no, this isn't hard at all. But it wasn't me. It wasn't of me saying it's not hard. It's just I had clearly seen the Lord prepare my heart for letting go of those things. And it's cool that your story is that of He sent you to Africa to have an experience that changed your view and and your spirit and your desires and how you wanted to live. And for everybody, it's different. Mm-hmm. And simplicity looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
I know for some, it's a simplicity in schedules. Like having a very busy schedule, God might be calling someone to really simplify their schedules and make margin in time. It could be space. It could be things. And I love the part of you mentioned that one of my favorite lines in your prayer is in the second paragraph. It says, Lord, I have a desire to put my family and our dreams, the dreams you've placed in our hearts, before worldly things we own. And it's great to see you make that note that it's not just your dreams, it was God's dreams for you that He had given you that motivated this change in your life.
Yeah, I really feel like that is a big encouragement for how we're able to press on some days, because, I mean, it's hard living in Los Angeles. I grew up, so did Zach, in the Midwest, and there are just kind of seemingly endless differences between here and there, and, you know, weather and homes and style and behavior and faith, how time is spent, things like that. And there's days when it feels like the only way I can get through this is knowing, like, this is where God wants us to be. One, like, kind of easy example of this is a lot of the people that I run into in our neighborhood we're about 5 miles from the beach. We're not close to downtown. It's maybe 30 minutes away, but we're still in Los Angeles. And it's really common for you to pass someone by outside and them to either look down at their feet, look away from you, I mean, look anywhere but at you as a person and acknowledge you. And I started running a few months ago, and I really noticed it even more, like how much people would spend time not noticing you. So I would just say, hello, or good morning, or how are you, as we pass them. And I'm feeling like more and more people are starting to say that back, if not, like, first to me. And I don't know if it's just my eyes being open to something different, or, you know, like that, maybe that change is being passed along. But, I mean, it's just, there are just kind of endless moments living here where I'm like, wow, this is hard, and the only way to get through this is from the Lord. And Zach's work schedule can be really busy at times. We're thankful that now he's at a company where they value family time quite a bit more than he's ever experienced out here. But, I mean, I think it's just been a neat thing to be able to say, okay, Lord, what's next? And just have those open hands, even though it can be really different from what we either grew up with, what other people would maybe choose for us, or what we would choose for ourselves even.
And that's really important, because there's a place in our lives where we have to really remember that God distinctly called us to certain things. It might not look like the world would expect of us. I love that you point that out, that it's not the status quo. It's maybe not what your parents or family or friends would have even think was the best for you or hoped for you. And it's in those moments where all we have is the promise that God called us to this, and He will provide, and He will be faithful. And it may be hard, but to stand firm in that He called you to this place. And
so true.
Yeah, and it's we have to cling to it. And I want to go back to what you said about saying hi to people. I know it might seem like a small thing, but I want to encourage you in that I believe you are changing the culture where you live and in your neighborhood. And you are the catalyst for that. And we've seen it. We live in an apartment community, and my husband and I's job here is to build community. We host events every month, and we connect people and just love on people. And we noticed that in our community that you get on the elevator and nobody would make eye contact. They'd stay on their phone. You pass them in the hallway. They're not, they don't say anything, and we started that. And it was funny. I'm an introvert, so that was a stretch for me to just be really proactive about. Actually, I worried that it was going to be a stretch for me, but God completely, has pushed me to say hi to people and get really confident and comfortable with it. But it's been really neat to see that we would say hi to people in the elevator and how's your day and connect. And about 3 or 4 months in, the staff at the apartment came to us and said, "You guys have created a monster." They were like, "People say hi to each other everywhere. We keep hearing our residents say this is like the friendliest community, and everyone says hi to each other in the hallways."
It's so great.
And it's so small. Like, I think it kind of breaks my heart a little bit that it is such a small thing. Like, you making eye contact may seem small to you, but it has changed the culture in your neighborhood and on your street that you run.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful thing. People, when you notice someone, when someone feels noticed and recognized, it changes something in their spirit. And it's a powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it has really taken me by surprise a few times saying hello to someone, and you can literally see them in their head thinking, she's talking to me. And, like, they just look at you like, oh, right, yes, hello. And it's just been crazy amazing.
It's opened my eyes about how broad ministry is. We a lot of times think it's the traditional in the church or leading in Bible study, things like that, but we forget the daily, day-to-day ministry opportunities that are everywhere. And I know for my husband and I personally, the stuff in our lives, and this is our personal story, the stuff in our lives and our big house that took so much to clean, and we had to pay for lawn care. And those things were distracting us. They were cluttering our mental space and our emotional space to manage and not freeing us up to see needs around us. Right. Yeah. Yep. And there is a correlation, I think, when you start clearing the clutter, whether it's time or things. And so tell me about how this move now to LA and simplifying. Tell me about some of the changes in your life that you've seen. Like
I mentioned, our living space it's small, it's tight, and there's not, we don't have a yard. We don't even really have a patio or a porch to go out onto. So wanting to be outside and have Max feel like he can be dirty and a boy and pick up things. And it's been interesting, though, like catching myself saying, like, no, don't. And really I'm like, well, why not? Like, why can't he get into that or whatever when we're outside? But, just getting out, knowing that living your life, you don't literally need to live inside the 4 walls of your home. And I think that sort of theme has been constant these last few years of like, the world really is a beautiful place. And the less we have, then the more I think we can appreciate one another. You have respect for one another. You can love your family in different ways because you are there to see them and cheer them on, or like anything that our family does right now when we're at home, like we're all doing it together because we have sort of a large common space in our living room that's part office, part playroom, living room. So we can all be together without doing the same thing. But just getting outside and, I don't think I realized how broad, but also how similar we can be with our neighbor. Just growing up in the same place, you're just familiar with what you know, and so moving around a little bit has opened that perspective quite a bit. And then, of course, going to Tanzania, that was the first time I really left the country. I think it's easy sometimes to feel like maybe Canada or Mexico or something is not leaving the country, but just going on that trip, a trip that large. I would say that probably the biggest struggle I've had with all this is feeling like it was time to slow down on my business and focus on the family more. In Minneapolis, I was maybe 12 weeks pregnant with Max when we moved. So I really didn't experience the pregnancy there. And for sure, we didn't have any kids living in that home, but we definitely had a lot of space. We would have had space for babies and the business. And moving out to LA, you just don't have that kind of space. And so I had to change my business a lot when we first got here. And just doing it for about a year, I felt like this doesn't feel right, and it's not the same. Of course it's not the same, but it didn't feel like it could be the same without some really major investments and changes, and I didn't feel that's where I was called to be. Looking back, I feel like definitely having this business and community has given me time now to be with my kids and my family more. Sort of setting me up for a community so that when we moved to LA, there were people that I could connect with through my blog or social media. And there's times now when I'm like, oh, I just wish I could sew or do this or that, or I want to be creative, but, doing a craft with your child or cooking dinner or, even going outside and doing something in your neighborhood, it's easy for those moments to not feel creative enough. But then I have to wonder, well, who is saying this is enough or not enough? Like, is it my neighbor or is it the Lord?
That's good. You really touch on a good thing, that God's called you to this place, and the calling also required you to sacrifice kind of the life that you had built there in Minneapolis and what you thought you would be doing. And was there a season of grieving what you had to sacrifice, or was it something where the Lord really carried you through and prepared your heart for the change and the adjustment?
Yeah, I would say more grieving came after our second child was born. With Max, I was able to do quite a bit still with the business. But then when I got pregnant with Natalie, so this was pretty crazy. I had just launched a second handmade shop. I think it was February of 2014, so just about a year ago. And like 5 or 7 days later from launching, I found out I was pregnant with her. And I kind of knew, like, okay, the Lord wanted me to finish this goal, this dream of mine, to launch this shop that I've been planning in my head for a couple of years now. Like, I had the courage to launch it, and I had a first run of product line, but then it was time for our family to grow instead of another business. So that was probably the hardest part. Once I had our second child, just realizing I can't do it all. Like, I really can't. And not only that, but I didn't want to. I mean, of course, I could have hired some help, either with the kids or our home or errands, things like that, but I just didn't feel like that was where I was called to be. And even now, I'm super happy and content with that choice, but there's still days where I feel like, man, like, I think I'm missing out. But then I think, no, you're not. You're not at all. And the days that are hard, I just have to remember that they're not here forever. They're hard to teach me something, not because I've made the wrong choice. I mean, it's been a huge adjustment, for me even. Zach's here doing something that he absolutely loves, and it's been neat to see that I can be here and do something I love as well, even though our initial move out here was not for my work. I'm seeing that in a different light now that we've been here a couple years.
Well, I'd love for you to close out our podcast by encouraging our listeners who might be in this place where they feel like God's calling them to simplify in their life. It could look like time. It could look like things. It could look like even relationships. Mm-hmm. So I'd love for you to encourage our listeners in this area as they might be a little fearful of making these changes or taking these steps?
Yeah. I think that a lot of times this can all tie back to the question, like, what is my purpose? And there's some questions that I kind of have for myself along these two topics, simplicity and purpose, and then like your family and friends and a career that you have. So I think it's good to remember like what brings you joy, what do you avoid, what personal or career obstacles are you trying to overcome. I feel like when you weed out the things that you don't need to do or don't want to do or don't find joy doing, it can leave you with sort of a shell, and that shell can be like, really a backbone for you to rebuild upon. So taking out what's kind of muddying up your day and simplifying that way, and then taking some time to reflect on your purpose. And if you simplify it a bit, does it make your purpose stand out more? And spend some time journaling or having quiet time, thinking about those things.
And I think those questions are so good, and as I'm listening to you talk through them, it makes me imagine that we need to process those in a vacuum, just me and God, because the moment we start looking around and what society expects of us, what our parents hope for us, what our friends are doing, and how they're living their life, we really start getting distracted.
Yeah, I totally agree.
That starts confusing really what God is trying to accomplish in us and through us.
Yeah, so I could not agree more.
That's a good list of questions to walk through, and I like how you say journaling, like to focus in, journal, and to really do it in a vacuum is so important, because we live in a world that has defined success for us, and it's usually not including simplicity.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like with journaling, what's so great about it is when you're writing down, you don't stop writing. Say you want to write for 5 minutes straight or 2 minutes. Like, oftentimes you just start kind of like heart dumping on your paper, and you're not thinking, like rethinking what you're writing. You're just saying, this is heavy on my heart, or this excites me, or I'm looking forward to this event or task or these people. So I feel like it's a really good way to kind of weed out what you're thinking about, and then looking back later when you have a little bit more time to process those things, and like those really are true thoughts that you're having. They're not just something that your neighbor has or so-and-so that you don't know, but just real true thoughts that you have on your heart.
Well, thank you, Maggie, so much for spending some time with us today, and so enjoyed hearing your story and your journey of living simple, and it resonates with me and my heart too, so I was excited about this podcast. But thank you for being a part of this project and your prayer, and love the words in it and the hope it gives to so many readers.
You're welcome, Jen. It's a real treat for me too.
For more information about our devotional, 31 Days of Prayer for the Dreamer and the Doer, and also our online community for dreamers, doers, and entrepreneurs, you can visit thewellstudio.co. Until next time, have a swell day.